Welcome to the Keiser Report with Stacy. Hi, I'm Max Keiser. With Stacy. Stacy?
Max, I want to say, we are up here in New York. Prior to this, we were in Washington, D.C. And of course, we did a live stream. We were periscoping on Twitter, showing our journey because it's quite dangerous to take the Amtrak train because there keep on being derailments. We were doing this just as the U.S. was bombing Syria, spending $100 million in one night on bombing an airfield. And yet there is no money to fund the infrastructure, the vital infrastructure of the United States. And I want to read this headline here, Amtrak's rolling train wreck. Here's the real reason those passenger trains keep derailing. A train derailment last week at New York's Penn Station may have caused more travel disruption in the Northeast than any snowstorm this winter, and waylaid commuters have Amtrak to thank. The snag that caused the accident reflects a systemic dysfunction at Amtrak that requires radical repair. I thought this was a good analogy for what is happening in the United States as Trump's whole platform is derailed and our infrastructure is dilapidated.
Oh, yeah. And there was that huge bridge collapse near Atlanta, wasn't there, recently?
That was caused by a crackhead under the bridge who dropped his pipe, yes.
Oh, yeah. And so infrastructure is a huge priority. We don't see much money going into infrastructure. The Amtrak train, yeah, you're thinking in the back of your head, am I going to get beat up by the Amtrak employees? Probably not. I think you need a private corporation like United Airlines to hire goons to come on the flight and beat you up in this way. But on a public corporation, it's just about being underfunded and having the train right off the tracks, perhaps. And where is all the money? Where is all this infrastructure spending we heard so much about?
Well, exactly, because all of Donald Trump's policies have been derailed. Remember, he came in, first he was going to make America great again. He was going to bring in these jobs. We're going to get to that in a second. Then he was going to, first day, he was going to ban Muslims. He tried that. That got overturned by the constitutional, basically checks and balances. Then he was going to get rid of Obamacare. He tried that. That failed.
Yeah.
Then he was going to try, then he said, I'm not going to do tax reform anymore. That's too hard because we can't even do Obamacare. So he started some wars. But some other parts of his platform that he promised the people of America was that, remember, on the campaign trail over and over and over and over and over, he said, China's a currency manipulator, China's a currency manipulator. That's why America is no longer great again. That's why we have train derailments. That's why you don't have jobs. It's because we don't have any money because currency manipulator China. And well, Donald Trump, China, not a currency manipulator. Donald Trump has said his administration will not label China a currency manipulator, rowing back on a campaign promise. The U.S. president also left open the possibility of renominating Janet Yellen as the head of the Federal Reserve, despite having criticized her. So those are the two big monetary policy and fiscal policy issues.
Yes, so no change then, business as usual. It's Hillary Clinton, but with a much worse hair. Basically, and sure. This is, I think...
And Hillary Clinton, by the way, she looks better in a pantsuit than he does.
Yep. The inertia here is too overwhelming. You can't really stop the gravitational forces of a U.S. economy. The U.S. economy broke up in 2008, essentially. There was a huge global financial crisis. And to bail out the bankers on Wall Street, or the top 1/10 of 1%, the central bank printed a lot of money, gave it to them to repair the holes in their balance sheet. You know, if you had a big margin call, if you had you were buying stocks and bonds with debt and suddenly you had negative equity or you had some problems, the central bank came in and they patched that all up for you. And then because they did away with a lot of regulations, the bank stocks like Goldman Sachs and others are going up 300%, 400%, 500%. So if you had $10 million before the crisis, you'll have $50 million today. And now these folks are sitting on top of hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars, and they don't take Amtrak. They don't know anybody who takes Amtrak.
Except for Joe Biden, famously always takes Amtrak.
Well, okay, there's, the exception to the rule. There's riding with Biden down there in the Amtrak. He looks good, with his little Amtrak lapel, taking the train. And, but it's been left for, to rot, essentially. And there's nobody coming to the rescue. Trump is not coming to the rescue. Nobody's coming to America's rescue. Hollywood's not coming to their rescue. There are no superheroes. Bernie Sanders will never get elected. Elizabeth Warren is never going to get elected. Anyone who could be helpful is people like to talk about them and say that they will vote for them, but when they finally comes to like Trump realized that everything that he said before the election, if he implemented it, he would go broke. It would hurt him financially.
Yes.
If he did anything he said he was going to do.
Yeah.
A lot of people said, well, maybe he's ready to give service. He's ready to do his bit for America, give something back. But then the reality is, wait a minute, I'm not going to hike interest rates in a way that would get rid of the parasites on Wall Street, because then my net worth would take a hit. I'm not going to do that. As a matter of fact, I'm going to do the opposite, because a rich Donald Trump is good for Donald Trump, is good for America.
Okay, well, you mentioned the interest rates. He doesn't want an interest rate hike. He said the reason why he said Yellen is no longer toast, which is a very like 70s, 80s New York sort of thing. She's no longer toast because he likes 0% interest rates, and the strong dollar, he said, trying to help China get
I love this whole thing when he's talking to the head of China when he's bombing, he's sending over the Tomahawk missiles, and he says to the head of the Chinese government, like, yeah, how do you like your cake? It's better than toast, right? That's some really great cake. Well, we just sent some missiles over to bomb Iraq. And someone pointed out, like, no, it wasn't Iraq, it was Syria. He's like, no, but maybe, whatever, but this is really great cake. I love this cake. This is the best cake. The cake is fantastic. It's Trump cake. It's the best cake. You can't get better cake than this. It's the absolute best cake.
Yeah, he only remembered from that night the chocolate cake, the beautiful chocolate cake.
This beautiful cake. You can't get cake like that anywhere else but in New York.
And Brian Williams on MSNBC was talking about the beautiful weapons that had been fired. So that was what the takeaway from that. But going back to the currency manipulation.
Show us on the doll, Brian Williams, where Donald Trump touched you.
So let's go back to this story about the currency manipulation. He says they're no longer currency manipulators. By the way, they are trying to manipulate the yuan. They're trying to manipulate it up because there's so much capital flight. Chinese government, the Chinese central bank, has spent over $1 trillion trying to maintain some sort of purchasing power for the currency.
The whole currency debate about manipulation is specious at best. Because, look, when you go off the gold standard, as the world did in 1971, and you develop for the first time a purely fiat currency standard where every single currency trades off each other, by definition, that is manipulation. Every single government with a fiat currency is manipulating their currency every single day to be in this thing called the global fiat currency matrix, outside of the gold standard.
Yeah, so let's go deeper into that. You have this fiat currency system, and nobody knows what is valued or overvalued or undervalued or what it is. You have to rely on an imbecile who thinks dropping bombs on Syria, the thing he remembers about it is a chocolate cake. Here he says the dollar is so strong. The dollar is too strong now, he said. But I think our dollar is getting too strong, and partially that's my fault, he said, because people have confidence in me.
I'm the greatest president that ever was. People think of me as president, and they start buying the dollar. I can't help it. They look at me and they say, you know what, I want to buy the dollar because Donald Trump's got the best cake. He's got the Trump cake. It's no better cake than the Donald Trump cake. I'm going to buy the U.S. dollar. I'm going to buy it all day long. I'm going to buy it to my nosebleeds. It ain't toast. It's the best currency you can possibly buy. All these other fiat currencies are terrible. You got to buy the Trump currency, right? So, but nevertheless, what is happening, other countries look at that and they go, my God, this guy's freaking nuts. I'm going to buy gold. Russia's buying gold. China's buying gold. And now increasingly really rich people are buying gold because they realize that this whole freaking thing's going to blow because some maniac with a bouffon has got his fingers on the nukes. They're going to buy gold. Of course they're going to buy gold. He doesn't know the difference between a chocolate cake and Mosul. He doesn't know the difference between, Trump Plaza and Bethlehem. He's got it all mixed up in his fakakta head. This New York City developer nightmare is playing out in real time. So people are saying, you know what? Buy me some more gold, darn it!
And then here's a tweet relating to this from the Wall Street Journal because, okay, so Trump had, on the campaign trail, he said, basically he accused China of raping America with their currency, undervalued currency. Here, Wall Street Journal says that Trump's backtracking on labeling China a currency manipulator indicates he may temper his aggressive trade threats. So remember, he was going to slap on all sorts of tariffs on Mexico, on China. He was going to renegotiate all sorts of deals. Now we hear from Wilbur Ross that they might start TPP again and TTIP, these Trans-Pacific and Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnerships, so that they would start again maybe on their own terms and blah, blah, blah. So all the things, there's a whole catalog of things.
But Trump
At least he did it fast.
Trump is the new Berlusconi.
Yes.
Okay, he's going to be hosting Bunga Bunga parties soon. And inviting world leaders to the Trump Tower, and they're going to have naked orgies and bunga bunga parties over there. He's the new Berlusconi. Media companies, reality TV, women with large breasts, jiggling breasts is kind of what he's good at, whether it's a beauty contest or some, reality TV show. It's all about jiggling breasts, and that's what Donald Trump, at the height of his intellectual prowess, is pasties on a pole dancer. That's the kind of like in New York in the 70s, like Show World. In the 70s in Times Square, that's where he developed his maturity as an adult in a frickin' peep show. Now he runs the country with atomic weapons. What could possibly go wrong?
Well, speaking of atomic weapons, we have talked about our interest rate policy as a sort of atomic weapon, as a weapon of mass destruction for sure. And that is also in the headline, the end of ultra easy money, ? And this is from Zero Hedge. And they say, after 8 years of extremely loose monetary policy, the economy is great again, and we are to enter into a post-stimulative period of monetary policy. So said Yellen at a recent discussion at the University of Michigan. In her words, the Fed had given the economy all the oomph they possibly could, and it was time to allow the economy to coast along. So the Fed, it seems, believes, even though the Atlanta Fed is saying that the U.S. economy is actually only growing at 0.6%, which is far below the population growth and inflation, that she believes that loose monetary policy is over. We can start selling off all our assets, these $4.5 trillion on the Fed's balance sheet, and interest rates could possibly rise. And
let me explain something to you all out there in TV land. The next big move in interest rates is going to be down, okay? And it's going to be prompted by a bond crisis or a market crisis. It'll be prompted from some careless frickin' event like Trump blows up Grenada. Or Trump, he attacks Scotland. Grenada. I'm talking like in New York in the 70s now. This is the new thing. You can't really pronounce anything correctly because it's all about get on my face, okay? He's going to blow something up. He's going to blow up Canada. What, the Trudeau just said he's going to let medical marijuana? What if Ivanka Trump says that's not good for the children? Trump's going to send a nuke to blow up Montreal, which is horrible because the Stanley Cup just started, and we got to find out who's going to win the Stanley Cup. That would be the biggest tragedy of them. So there's going to be a huge freaking catastrophe brought on by this psychopath, and they're going to lower rates. They're going to lower interest rates. The next major move is going to be down. That's why gold, and Bitcoin.
And before we go to the second half, I want to say that Zero Hedge says that if GDP forecasts for the first quarter are correct, i.e. the economy is only growing at 0.6%, this will be the weakest economy since 1987.
You can't raise interest rates at that environment.
Exactly, in which rates were increased. So.
All right.
I'm going to be here in the second half, so just throw it to the
you're in the second half as well?
Yes.
All right, that's fantastic. I'm interviewing you in the second half?
No, we're going to interview Mike Maloney, but first
we
have
are?
to set it up.
Oh,
yes,
that's fantastic.
The second half.
Okay, let's keep with this 70s theme. I'm going to wear some flared bell bottoms and going to have some other 70s dances. Hoo, 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 stay alive. Welcome back to the Funky Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. I'm here with Disco Queen, Stacy Herbert. Hey, so speaking of gold, Stacy, as luck would have it, we had an occasion to talk with Mike Maloney of goldsilver.com.
Yes. You were talking about the 70s and you were talking about gold. We were on the Gold Center back in the 70s. We had some funky music. We had some funky times. People were still wealthy. Workers earned honest wages, real wages in which they could afford homes. They could afford to live here in Manhattan. We ran into Mike Maloney. I grabbed my smartphone and I went after him. We talked to him on the streets here. Here's a clip.
Mike, nice to see you again.
It's great seeing you again, Max. How you doing?
All right, the drums are beating. The gold bugs are breathing. things are turning, cycles are flipping around. It looks like the time to talk to you about gold and silver is upon us once again. Mike, let me ask you this. The U.S. dollar, it's strong, but it's backed by the Pentagon. It's backed by a Ponzi scheme called the Federal Reserve Banking System. When you're the cycle master, is the end of the cycle near?
I think it's pretty darn close. These economic expansions can't last forever. We have a recession, and then there's an expansion. This is now the third longest expansion in history. There have been 47 economic expansions in the history of the United States, so the odds are that it's going to end sometime very, very soon.
Okay, now to put things in perspective, back in the 2008 period when they had a subprime collapse, and then the Fed came in and started printing lots of money, and some folks said, hey, this is going to be inflationary. And you rightly pointed out that, actually it's going to be kind of deflationary because the money printing is not going to be fast enough to account for the collapse of asset prices. And sure enough, we've had this deflation. And in that deflation, bond prices have gone up, interest rates have gone down. The Fed has taken on trillions of dollars worth of so-called assets. And according to your cycle work and theory, at some point that flips, and we see then the beginning of inflation. Now there's two types of inflation, or there's more than two types, but let me ask you this. Just talk a little bit about real inflation versus inflation, if you will, and are we on the cusp of a breakout of inflation?
Well, we've had real inflation of base currency, the currency that the Federal Reserve creates. We have had a deflation of the non-base currency portion of the M2 money supply. There has been a collapse in the credit creation from banks that the Federal Reserve almost exactly offset with all of their currency creation. And that is the reason you didn't see the inflation occur on Main Street. You only saw it occur in Wall Street and some of the other asset classes. But we're getting to the end of this thing, and like I've said many times before, I'd rather be a year or two early than one day late. This time, it's really going to be something. It took a 400% increase in the base currency supply to get a certain amount of economic pop.
We're back in the studio. Hey, you know what? We had a cut right there because the copyright terrorists. That's right. We were outside doing this interview when some song in the background, some James Brown was playing, talking about the godfather of soul, the inventor of funk. And so we had it, and now we're back in the studio.
Of course, James Brown wore a lot of gold. He liked gold.
Yeah.
And I'm going to read you the rest of the text. You can watch. Hopefully, our editor will be able to drop some of the video of Mike Maloney as the next 20 seconds he is talking, but the James Brown music is playing in the background, so I will read because copyright terrorism, you're not allowed to, even though you're in the public space, they can control what you're allowed to hear in that space. So Mike Maloney says it will probably take about the same amount again, but this time instead of starting at 0.8 trillion, we're starting at 4 trillion. So you're talking about an increase in the currency supply that is unlike the world has ever known, except for places like Weimar, Germany.
Right. Now, the thing about gold is that you typically look at it at the valuation in terms of debt that's outstanding, and you try to figure out, well, there's how much debt per ounce of gold in the world, and so what's the intrinsic value of per ounce versus the debt in the world. And since the debt has increased quite dramatically over the past 5, 6, 7 years, the actual value of gold is cheaper today versus the debt than when it was at $250 an ounce. Even though it's above $1,000, even though it's above $1,200 an ounce, relative to the amount of debt in the world, it's cheaper than it was when it was at $250 to $300 an ounce. That's how much debt exploded around the world. That's why it's suddenly becoming quite compelling for money managers and investors now to own gold.
By the way, I just want to say that I feel kind of like that victim on the United Airlines flight. The fact that we are in a public space, thousands of people around, and that you can't hear the words, which his words are more important, perhaps, in this situation than James Brown's music. The fact that you have to cut away from that just because of these copyright issues and his background noise, I don't understand that. I feel like we're being dragged off the plane. We're being dragged back into the studio to have to read his text.
Well, the public space is being shrunk down to being non-existent. America was built on the idea of a public space. Democracy is kind of like the public space, public participation. The value of America should be judged on how aggressively the public space is expanding. The fact that it's diminishing to the point where you have virtually no public space means America, by definition, is dead.
So the last words he had said before we cut back to the video is, the world has never known this sort of increase in the currency supply since, except for places like Weimar, Germany. So cut back to the tape.
I hear the music in the background. It sounds like James Brown. Are we ready to get funky in the precious metals markets? That's what I want to know. Get on the good foot. Get on the one. Now, let me ask you something. Price signals are a big part of economics, okay? The markets come together, buyers, sellers, and the result is a price, and that's a signal, and that telegraphs to the rest of the economy how they should act, and then the whole cycle repeats over and again. If the price signal mechanism breaks down, you have a breakdown across the economy. In the gold market and in the silver market, we've said for many years that there's price manipulation going on in the precious metal sector. And a lot of people say, no, you guys are paranoid. We've just now heard that insiders at the Bank of England have admitted to rigging Libor. And this is on top of a lot of evidence to suggest that there's been rigging in precious metals. What are your thoughts at this juncture on that?
Well, it's more than just evidence. I mean, right now we have had the evidence is there. There's current court lawsuits going on. The precious metals markets have been rigged. The AM and PM fix, the London fix, is one of the things where they've already proven that it's been rigged. And what happens, though, is rigging destroys that price discovery mechanism and causes distortions that allow the opportunity. I'm glad that it was rigged because I got to buy precious metals at an artificially depressed price. The rigging was to cause a suppression.
Right, okay, let's focus on this. But the demand for precious metals has been actually quite high, particularly in countries that are going under stressful situations, Venezuela for one, and others. And so the demand is quite high, and yet the price has been soft. Whereas in the bond market, the supply has never been greater in the history of financialized markets, and yet with all that supply, the price is going up. This is a complete repudiation of all the rules and regulations we know about economics. How long can this go on, Mike Maloney?
Well, you can't possibly have a manipulation-free economy if you've got a central bank that is allowed to purchase assets by counterfeiting. And so
talk about that a minute, because that's a key point. They print the money out of their thin air, and then they buy real stuff with it, right?
Right. It is one of the most immoral things that I've ever heard of, allowing any entity to purchase real assets and bid them away from you and I with currency they created from nothing.
Now, the pent-up demand for gold, I would think now would represent an interesting scenario where once the wheels come off this dollar-denominated global economy, and it looks like with the U.S. needing some countries to come into the fold, principally Russia, China, Iran, to extend their Ponzi scheme, if they push back, and they have the wherewithal to push back, and the Ponzi scheme that is the U.S. dollar comes to an end, and the inflation starts to kick in, the ability to keep that gold price down using manipulation, if that breaks apart, then would we see a gap price on the upside?
Yes, it would be a catapult, and it should be something spectacular. You know, it's been manipulated for so long, there's so much energy built up, and then you've got things occurring like Russia and China and India purchasing, on the average, they're purchasing an amount equal to or greater than the entire world production of gold. So it means that the rest of what they're purchasing is coming from the West. So we're sellers. We're going to end up being the people that are poor. They're going to be, and you know, they've been very, very smart.
Right, so I mean, the world production of gold, the figures off the top of my head, it's roughly 300 tons, 350 tons, and they're buying more than that every year. They're buying more than the annual production of gold. And the only place they can get that really is from the West. So the West is liquidating their gold to keep the paper Ponzi scheme afloat. China, Russia are meanwhile accumulating gold. And oh, by the way, they're now at loggerheads, and it looks like we're on the precipice of World War III. You know, it's like going to a gunfight with a knife. This is a paper knife versus solid gold bricks. You know, like America is going to defeat Russia and China by throwing paper airplanes at them, you know, and they're going to be starting throwing gold bricks. I mean, you know, is that going to work?
Exactly. And I think that you're going to see the average person in the United States get a lot poorer, and the people that are holding gold and silver are going to get a lot wealthier. It just amazes me that this Ponzi scheme of the stock markets has gone on for so long, and we're having this rally still. And it's at the very end of this very stretched out economic expansion that's been the weakest economic expansion in U.S. history.
That's what people
It's-
don't understand that. The expansion's been the weakest in history. The latest numbers like 0.6 with 1% GDP growth. Absolutely tepid. But more debt. More debt.
Right.
Less growth. All right, got to cut her off there. Mike Maloney, thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank our guest, Mike Maloney of goldsilver.com. If you want to reach us on Twitter, it's Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.